We see things that are wrong in the world and we're trying to fix them. I mean, maybe we created them with other policy, or maybe we, created them with technology or whatever else we did. But they're problems, they're things that are going on in the world, right? Well, if we think about, all right, so what does Christianity say about these social problems? Well, Christianity says that the root of these social problems is really sin, right? That the reason we have these problems are that we're all sinners. We're seeking our own selfish way rather than, God's way, rather than looking after our brother first. If that's the case, well, let's think about it. What's the real solution to that problem? It's a spiritual problem. It's not a political problem, right? And the real solution to that problem, the only real solution to that problem is Jesus Christ, right? Well, we know that that's not how, Jesus hasn't, until Jesus comes back, right, the political problems are still there, right? These social problems are still there. So we know that any political thing that we put forward is never really going to solve it. It, at best, is only going to make it a little bit better. So why do we approach these political problems with such, fervor, right? It's like, wait a second. Right? We're not fixing nothing. We're really just working on symptoms, right? And so this could be one way in which we sort of restate the way that we think about problems and think about social policy. Right? Great.
Thank you, Dr. May. So. I think a lot of what I'll say is going to be very in a similar spirit as what's already been said, but I'm going to do the travesty of kind of reading from a paper, but hopefully it's still a little lively. So for me, the Christian University has a unique ability to explore deep questions that isn't always possible at today's polarized and value-free secular universities. The support of Christians for President Trump, however, risks marginalizing the Christian voice in the public sphere by affiliating the faith with a polarizing political figure. Instead, the Christian University should provide the intellectual diversity and vigorous debate that is often lacking at secular institutions. This means serving as a true marketplace for ideas and reaffirming the importance of a religious voice in the public sphere. So some 20 years ago, one of my favorite thinkers, a man named Richard John Nahas, argues that the Christian University attempts to articulate a comprehensive account of reality and to investigate the hard questions about what it all means. Secular institutions, I believe, have largely backed away from that role. But concerns over fake news, growing inequality, and polarized politics makes asking the hard questions about the American polity all the more important. Therefore, the Christian University is needed today more than ever. For me, the Christian University, the heart of the Christian University, is about the conviction that faith and truth are ultimately compatible. The faith that animates American Christianity and the Christian University declares that the truth is not only real, but seeks to be known and to be known by us. Truth in the Christian perspective is not merely objective, existing out there, and it's not merely subjective in existing within ourselves, but it's ultimately interpersonal and relational, rooted in Christ and his declaration that the way that he is the way, the truth, and the life. I think this vision of truth is very much at odds with the contemporary secular institution, which has seemed to kind of let other goals take the place of truth. And there's also a pretty clear lack of intellectual diversity at a lot of secular institutions, and there's some data to back that up. So can the Christian University provide this role that secular institutions are not doing? I think it can, but there's some important challenges that the Christian University has to grapple with in order to do so. And the recent election illustrates this challenge. During the 2016 election, now President Trump received an overwhelming level of support by American evangelicals. Leaders such as Jerry Falwell Jr. of Liberty University and Dr. Robert Jeffries of the First Baptist Church of Dallas loudly and consistently affirmed President Trump's candidacy. Exit polls analyzed by the Pew Research Center showed that 81% of white evangelical Christians and 60% of white Catholics voted for Trump. And the support of evangelicals were clearly important for Trump's electoral victory. In many ways, the support for Trump is consistent with trends within American Christianity that go back at least to the 1970s, with groups like the Moral Majority leading to the election of Ronald Reagan, and then George W. Bush in 2000. After 8 years of living in the proverbial political wilderness under President Barack Obama, it's clear that American conservative Christians were probably willing to accept and support any candidate that would be favorable to their policies. The problem, of course, is that many of Trump's stances and behaviors clearly ain't out of accordance with the kinds of things that Christians might be expected to support. Even if some of the policy choices of the Trump administration are maybe favorable to some Christians, the affiliation of the faith with Trump may water down its prophetic witness. Divisive policy announcements, such as the attempt to ban transgender troops from serving in the military, have been interpreted as concessions to conservative Christians, which implies that the faith is willing to marginalize and ostracize the most vulnerable groups in society. The image of Christianity that threatens to emerge from this affiliation is strikingly similar to the image of the secular university, lacking intellectual and political diversity. So how do we get above that? Well, I think that Christian university can resist these trends by modeling real intellectual diversity and critically engaging with arguments supporting and opposing different political positions. The Christian university can perform this role because it has a stated end that goes beyond day-to-day politics. Politics in a Christian perspective is not the final word on a topic or issue, but rather there's a higher end towards which we are all striving. And in light of that end, our political disputes can appear in clearer perspective. So the Christian university has a peculiar witness that it can perform to the secular world. Far from being dogmatic institutions that train their students to conform to particular political persuasions, the Christian university can model John Stuart Mill's marketplace of ideas. The Christian university can do so because its conviction that faith and truth are ultimately compatible. Truth may be difficult to grasp, but to quote the words of the Apostle Paul, we see through a glass darkly. The pursuit of truth may lead to dead ends and false summits along the way, yet truth is real and therefore knowable. Our faith compels us to seek the truth, and in seeking the truth, we deepen our faith. So just to conclude with 3 points, how do we do that? Well, one, I think, is modeling real debate on complex issues, and that's actually the motivation behind this panel today, a real dialogue on complex, controversial issues. Finding commonality on both sides of the political aisle. Both sides have good points, and I think as Christians we can affirm where good points lie and where bad points lie. We can reject those. And I think we also need to hold accountable any Christian leader that substitutes faith for access to power. That's where I'll stop. Last but not least, Dr. Williams.
So first of all, I want to thank everybody for coming. I also want to thank Dr. Marinette for all the work that he's put into organizing the panel. Being able to provide opportunities like this has been kind of a goal for a lot of us for a while, and it's always nice when you have a new professor who shows up at campus who's actually willing to do the work that the residents have been talking about for years. So first, to begin, I want to go back and think a little bit about the question that we've been posed to ask, and I want to break down the question a little bit as a way of explaining where I get to my answer. The question that we began with was, what is the role of a Christian university in contemporary America? And so I begin by, first of all, asking questions like, what is different about contemporary America that has led us to ask this question? And secondly, what is it about the Christian university that makes it unique and uniquely positioned to address the problems of contemporary America? And it shouldn't be surprising that as a political scientist, my colleague and I, working independently, come to some very similar conclusions. So first of all, what is unique about politics in contemporary America? I think that what we're seeing today is something that is unique in that our politics today are intentionally postmodern. Now, to oversimplify, what I mean is that postmodernism has embraced this idea that either there is no truth or that truth is somehow fluid. It's not entirely nihilistic, but nonetheless, this notion of efficiency in idea or perfection of idea has been largely abandoned by postmoderns. Now, postmodernism has been around for a long time. In fact, many people argue that we are in a post postmodern age of intellectualism. And you see it in things like the way that we talk about race. Whereas once we would say that there was an American race or a British race or an Italian race, and then later we would say that there was a black race or a white race. Today we argue claims like race doesn't exist. Whereas once we said that there were clear distinctions between gender, today we talk about gender as being fluid. Where once we would say that there were countries that were democratic or non-democratic, now we are constantly redefining democracy, as if democracy somehow becomes bigger the closer we get to the notion of democracy. What's different, though, is that up until now, I would argue, political systems have been at war with the notion of postmodernism, if only because truth is necessary to be successful at politics. Now, this doesn't mean there's an absolute truth, but if I want to engage in a political campaign, I must convince you that my truth is the correct truth. If as a state I want to motivate or mobilize my citizens, the easiest way to do that is to create the notion that there is an us and an other, and that truth is the mobilizing truth. But what we see today is that both sides of the American political spectrum appear to be arguing that there is no truth upon which we can stand in different ways. So for example, whereas progressives have always been trying to renegotiate the social contract with the New Deal or the Great Society, modern American progressives are almost saying that each individual person gets to negotiate their own identity in contrast to the existence of some form of overarching social contract. We see the same thing on the opposite side with conservatives. So whereas Donald Trump's slogan, "Make America Great Again," suggests that there is some form of truth, the political behavior of Donald Trump has been to attack the very notion of truth. I mean, think about this. We have a candidate who won an election and then immediately declared that the election itself should be cast into suspicion, that we can't trust the results of the election that he won. A candidate who used the media to rise to success and then attacks that very same media as being nothing but false news. His attacks on his opponents, calling into question Representative John Lewis's work ethic when he was one of the leaders of the civil rights movement, John McCain's war effort, whenever John McCain was one of our proudest veterans, and the list could go on and on. It is as if what Donald Trump is trying to suggest is that by destroying your connection to truth, it is actually easier to be persuaded by him that his particular brand or version of the truth is the most easy to accept. So given that, where does that leave Christian universities, and what do Christian universities get to do? Well, to summarize a bit of a longer argument, what I think is, as Dr. Marino pointed out, that what Christian universities do different from other schools is that while other universities claim that knowledge is important, Christian universities argue that there is in fact a truth, and that finding that truth is what's important. Not simply that we should accumulate knowledge for the sake of knowledge, but that we should find what the ultimate truth is. This means that students who attend schools, faculty who work here, communities that host these institutions, must not only be trained in what truth means, but we must also be trained in figuring out and identifying what is false, so that we can observe the behavior of politicians in this contemporary age where truth does not exist, and at the very least identify the things that they're telling us that are in themselves not true or in violation of the ultimate truth. I'll stop there and we can talk more in questions.
It's almost a shame that we only had 5 minutes. I feel like a lot of these ideas we could have had a much longer discussion. So I appreciate everyone's efforts to keep their comments to 5 or 6 minutes. So let's turn the floor open to questions and comments from the audience. I'll play the role of moderator. So any comments and questions?
Well, I must observe that the idea of truth that Dr. Williams is talking about, if we have a premise that there is Christianity as the template through which we should see through that filter, we need to know how to define that. because our understanding of Christianity and what it stands for vary. So the foundation is already blurred, if you will. And therefore, what are we striving towards? What does that role play in the university? So I think a clear definition of that would have been helpful, in my opinion, a little bit. When we take, let's say, a theological position through which to launch this discussion and view that there's truth out there that are God's truth. As Augustine would put it, all truth is God's truth in the sense of general revelation, or that Jesus Christ is the center of truth. As you know, we believe that in systematics and also the Bible. Then that's the position from where we are negotiating our position with the rest of the world. And you know, with the international community here, I wondered about how they are engaging the basis of what truth that we are, you know, we cannot assume that they know what we're talking about completely, always, because, you know, they come from different backgrounds. And so we have Confucius thinking, we have Shinto thinking, we have Hindu thinking, we have postmodern thinking, you know, we have modernistic thinking. So in many ways, you know, there are many trajectories of what truth is. And so I think in order to get there, getting closer to the kernel of that truth may be a good starting point. And I think in your discussion about intellectual diversity, you know, is a wonderful one. I think in our case, because we take either a dogmatic position or a more liberal position, sometimes in that kind of an environment, it's hard to stay neutral, because you know, one can not necessarily skew, but over present their position, and therefore, you know, where is that true dialogue happening? Where, you know, I like to take some of yours and you take some of mine, kind of a thing, you know. So those are my observations. You know, I think it's a wonderful presentation that each one has given, and that I would really like to see this forum continue, so that it would be great to have secular views represented, to be able to say, you know, you have given us a nugget of truth here that we can wrestle with. So, but thank you for the opportunity.
Great comment. Good comments and questions. Anyone want to respond to any of those comments?
One thing that I agree with you completely, and I think to a certain degree, Tom Bell's point sort of illustrates that as well. That one of the things that we should be doing as a Christian university is promoting our truth. What I would though ask, is the Christian university only valuable to Christians? Because if the Christian university's primary responsibility and only responsibility is the promotion of Christian truth, it becomes valueless to those who reject Christianity.
Correct.
But if what we can do is, as some of the other panelists have suggested, let's find what the common denominators of truth are between Confucianism and Hinduism and Shintoism and Christianity. Even if we don't go so far as to accomplish the ultimate goal of the Great Commission, by identifying those truths and finding a space where those truths can be discussed, we're still providing value to both the guests on our campuses, but also to the broader community in the secular world.
Exactly. No, I totally agree with you. I think the idea of find your calling is expressly Christian, and that even so, the non-Christians still come into our campus. I'm not sure they fully understand what that means, but it clearly is portraying a notion that when you come here, you expect to be, you know, immersed in a Christian environment, and therefore that is understood. When I travel overseas, let's say, you know, I cannot talk to people who are oppositional to Christianity on Christian values expressly as, you know, Jesus Christ thing. I can talk to them about moral values. I can talk to them about character development. I can talk to them about value education kind of thing. And but does that betray, you know, my stance on my faith in my Christ? And you know, I'm saying that it does not. You know, maybe they don't have a platform or a context to decipher and, you know, really understand. So here's a common ground that I'm facilitating so that we can have this kind of discussion. So I think nomenclatures in some ways do matter, but I think here, when students come in, if they had critically thought through, as Dr. Karen was saying, critically thought through the process, them being here should have raised those questions, if you will. But I totally agree with you. If it is a Christian university, the role of Christianity obviously, must undergird the Christianity part of liberal arts and sciences.
And I think another thing is that as the Christian university, I think one of the things we can do is help put the best Christian foot forward, right? Like, this is the best Christian. It's like okay, people don't buy into Christian thinking, but at least we can serve as somehow to say, okay, this is the best. This is the best version of Christian thinking, as opposed to just what any Christian may say with regard to any other aspect. So as far as our witness to the world, I guess,
One thing that I think is important in that is that we as educators need to integrate Christ wherever we can. So what separates us from UK and us? Christ. We both offer a secular education, so to speak, but we need to integrate Christ into it, because in the secular university, you're going to be fed the world's view over and over again as the only option. So just look at some of the different disciplines at the secular universities, where if you're a Christian, they'll seek to kick you out of school. So I think we here at the Christian University, we have a venue to actually integrate the Christian thought. So for example, I teach a sport law class. Okay, so law's pretty dry, right? Okay, well, where did our laws come from? They came from the Bible. That's where they came from. Our founders came here to establish a community, so to speak, that had Christian foundation. So I want to bring into my law class the fact that this nation started as a Christian nation based upon the scriptures. We have 3 forms of government, which comes out of Isaiah. We have, all of these, I want to bring these out to my students to know that there is another option to what UK is presenting to you, or whatever else. So I think that's, if I taught at UK, I would not have a job anymore, if I did that. So this is the only place where I can do that, and that's why I'm here.
Okay, can I briefly?
Yeah,
I really like the panels and all those great sharings. Thank you, first of all. And I really liked that, so first of all, like, what is the truth? And of course, like, Jesus is the truth and the way and, and the life. And we agree that I liked what Ruiz said, that we should agree, we should not make any compromise on like the absolute ultimate truth, which is Jesus Christ. But in minor issues, we can have an open dialogue. And I also kind of agree with what, as Dr. Rutherford